My name is Nina. I'm 24. And last week my parents kicked me out of the house but still expected me to keep paying their bills. No warning, no family meeting, just a verdict dropped after dinner like a sentence. It all started because I finally said no. I refused to wire more money for my sister's new semester when my own savings account was gasping for air. And that tiny word, no, was enough to flip my life upside down. The argument escalated fast. Voices rose, chairs scraped, and suddenly, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was just the walking ATM that dared to malfunction. "If you don't want to help, then you don't need to live here," my father snapped, pointing toward my room like it was already vacant. My mother didn't even blink. She just crossed her arms and said I'd still transfer the rent and utilities because that's only fair. Fair. As if fairness had ever been part of this deal. I could have begged. I could have cried. Instead, I swallowed every word burning on my tongue, went to my room, and started folding my life into cardboard boxes. With each drawer I emptied, the anger settled into something colder, sharper. If they wanted me gone but still wanted my money, fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for. And then I would show them what it really costs to treat someone like a paycheck with legs. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out that door, and how that one decision turned my whole family's world upside down, tell me, what time is it where you are? And where are you watching from? I want to see just how far this story travels. That first night, I crashed on an old friend's lumpy couch, staring at the water stain on her ceiling, while my brain replayed every word my parents had thrown at me. I kept hearing that one sentence on a loop. "You'll still pay rent and utilities. That's fair." Fair. I'd spent years wiring money home from my marketing job in New York, juggling campaigns by day and side gigs by night just to keep everyone afloat. And somehow I was still the selfish one for finally saying no. Sleep never really came. It was more like a series of anxious blinks until morning. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. If they saw me as an endless stream of automatic transfers, then shutting off that stream was the only way to make them feel what I'd been quietly enduring. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of cruelty. It was about balance, consequences. Still, my chest tightened as I pulled on yesterday's jeans, thanked my friend for the crash space, and stepped out into the sharp city air. I walked to the small cafe where I always went to think. The one place that felt like neutral ground between my old life and whatever came next. The bell over the door chimed as I walked in, and a familiar voice called out from behind the counter. "Rough night?" It was Jason, the barista who'd watched me power through deadlines and breakdowns with nothing but coffee and stubbornness. I slid into my usual corner seat while he brought over my drink without asking. "You look like someone just repossessed your soul," he said, dropping into the chair across from me when the morning rush thinned. "They kicked me out," I said flatly. "Told me to pack my stuff so my sister could have my room. And then they reminded me I'd still be paying their rent and utilities, because apparently I'm the only one who doesn't get a free ride." I let out a humorless laugh. All because I refused to send more money for tuition when my savings is hanging by a thread. The words tasted bitter coming out, but saying them out loud made the absurdity almost surreal. Jason's expression hardened as he listened. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "They throw you out, but they still expect you to keep funding the house? That's not family. That's a subscription service with emotional blackmail attached." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "So what are you going to do? Keep paying and pretend this is normal?" I looked down at my phone, the banking app glowing like a guilty secret. "I don't know," I admitted, though a sharp voice inside me whispered that I did. I remembered all the late nights skipping dinner so I could send an extra $100 home, turning down a promotion because it required a move they said they weren't ready for, quietly paying off a credit card bill that wasn't even mine. For years, I'd treated their emergencies like they were my responsibility. If I stop, They'll drown, I added quietly. But if I don't, I will. Jason didn't flinch. Maybe it's time they learn to swim, he said. You can't set yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm forever. At some point, you have to ask who would actually do the same for you. His words landed like a punch and a hug at the same time. I pictured myself at 40, still living paycheck to paycheck because every raise, every bonus, every bit of progress vanished into someone else's crisis. The cafe faded into a low hum as another version of my life flashed before my eyes, one where I never left, never said no, never drew a line. In that version, I was still in that same bedroom, still wiring money every month, still apologizing for not being enough. The thought made my stomach twist. Sometimes the only way people learn the value of something is when it disappears. I opened our family group chat and started typing. From today on, I won't be sending money for rent, utilities, or tuition. I need to prioritize my own life and future. I hope you'll understand. But even if you don't, this decision is final. My thumb hovered over the send button while my heart pounded in my ears. If you don't hit send, Jason murmured, they'll never take you seriously, and you'll never forgive yourself for backing down. I took a breath. Imagined the life I actually wanted, a tiny apartment I paid for myself, a savings account that wasn't bleeding, a future that belonged to me, and I hit send. For a full minute, nothing happened. No typing bubbles, no instant explosion. The silence was almost louder than the fight we'd had. Then my phone lit up with a single reply. We'll talk about this later. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a promise of more pressure. I locked my screen and looked at Jason. I need to find my own place, I said, the words coming out steadier than I felt. He nodded. Good. Let them feel what life is like without your money for once. I didn't know it yet, but that message was the first domino. Later was coming, and it was going to hit all of us harder than I imagined. A week later, I stood in the middle of a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens, surrounded by mismatched furniture from online classifieds and half-unpacked boxes. The place smelled like fresh paint and old pipes, but it was mine. No one's footsteps above my room, no knock on the door asking if I'd sent the transfer yet. No envelopes with red past due stamps that weren't even addressed to me, just bare walls, a sagging couch, and the faint hum of traffic outside the window. For the first time in years, my paycheck went toward my life alone. Rent, groceries, a modest savings transfer that made me irrationally proud. But the quiet was brutal. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt like punishment. At my parents' house, there was always noise, TV blaring, doors slamming, someone arguing about something. Here, every sound came from me. The click of my laptop, the kettle hissing on the stove, the creak of the floor when I paced the same 5 steps back and forth. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out an old shoebox I'd tossed into a moving box without thinking. Inside were folded bank statements, crumpled receipts, and scribbled notes where I'd tried to track payments over the years. I sat cross-legged on the floor, spreading them out like puzzle pieces. Tuition deposits, utility payments, a surprise hospital bill, groceries during layoffs. Line after line of my name next to their emergencies. No one ever asked how those withdrawals felt on my end. No one ever called during my own hard weeks unless they needed something. Guilt and anger tangled in my chest until it was hard to breathe. I grabbed my phone without fully knowing what I wanted to say and opened a chat I'd been avoiding. My sister's. The last message there was a casual meme from months ago, before everything exploded. I typed, erased, typed again. Finally, how are you holding up? It was simple, almost painfully neutral, but it was a start. She replied faster than I expected. Honestly? Freaked out. They're panicking about money. Financial aid says the tuition is late. I don't know what to do. The words hit harder than any insult my parents had thrown at me. For a second, I almost opened my banking app out of reflex. Almost. Instead, I pressed the phone to my chest and stared at the ceiling, listening to the radiator hiss like it was judging me. Another message came in. They keep saying you'll come around, that you're just acting out. Are you? That question sliced deeper than she realized. I thought about all the exams she'd studied for while I worked overtime, all the textbooks I'd bought instead of upgrading my dying laptop, all the times I'd told her, "Don't worry, I've got it," while silently praying my card wouldn't decline. I typed slowly, choosing every word like it might detonate. "I'm not acting out," I wrote. "I'm done being the only one acting like an adult. I'm happy to talk to you, to help you figure things out. But I'm not going to keep fixing everything with my bank account. It's not sustainable. For anyone." I stared at the message for a long moment before sending it. The three little dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, "I didn't realize how much you were carrying. They never showed me the numbers. I just thought you were okay." I exhaled a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "I wasn't," I replied. "I just got really good at pretending." Then, because I couldn't stop myself, I added, "They made me feel like a villain for finally saying no. Do you think I'm wrong?" It was a risky question, but I needed to know if anyone in that house could see my side. There was a longer pause this time. When her answer finally came, it was hesitant, but honest. "I don't think you're wrong," she wrote. "I just hate that I'm stuck in the middle. I'm scared, Nina." My throat tightened. For a moment, I saw us as kids, sharing a tiny bed during a power outage, promising we'd always be on the same team. Somewhere along the way, team had turned into dependence, and no one had told me the rules changed. We kept chatting for a while, about her classes, my new apartment, her part-time job search. But when the conversation ended, the quiet came back, heavier than before. I lay on my back on the floor, surrounded by proof of everything I'd paid for, and realized something unsettling. I wasn't just fighting my parents. I was fighting the version of myself they had built, a version that believed suffering in silence was what love looked like. If you've ever chosen yourself, and then spent nights wondering if that made you the villain, you know exactly how that quiet feels. Have you ever been made to feel guilty for finally setting a boundary with someone you love? A few days after that late-night conversation, my sister asked if we could meet in person. "Somewhere not the house," she added. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how things were going back home. We agreed on a park halfway between my apartment and our old neighborhood, a stretch of patchy grass and crooked benches framed by tall buildings and the faint roar of the city. I got there early and sat on a bench with a takeout coffee, watching kids chase each other near the swings while dog walkers shuffled past with tangled leashes. My mind was already spinning through the possible versions of this conversation. Would she beg me to come back? Guilt trip me into paying? Cut me off completely for abandoning the family? I had answers ready for each scenario, but my hands still shook around the cup. When she arrived, she looked smaller somehow, like the stress had folded her in on herself. Dark circles under her eyes, hair thrown into a messy bun, a backpack slung over one shoulder stuffed with textbooks. She sat down beside me without a word, and for a moment we just watched the chaos of the playground in silence. "So," she finally said, forcing a laugh that cracked in the middle. "You really did it. Your own place. No more family drama in your bedroom." I glanced at her, trying to read her tone. There was envy there, sure, but also something like resentment and fear tangled together. "I really did it," I answered. "And the drama didn't stay in the house. It just found my phone instead." I tried to make it sound like a joke, but we both knew it wasn't. I turned to face her fully. "How bad is it?" She chewed her lip, avoiding my eyes. They're freaking out, she admitted. They thought you'd cool off and start sending money again. Dad keeps saying you're being ungrateful after everything they've done for us. Mom cries a lot, and the tuition office called. Twice. Her voice dropped on the last word. Guilt stirred in my gut, but I forced myself not to flinch. And what do you think? I asked quietly. Don't repeat their lines. Tell me what you actually think. She picked at the fraying thread on her sleeve. I didn't realize how much you were paying for, she said. They always talked like it was family money, like we were all sacrificing. But I've started seeing the statements and it's mostly your name, your income, your overtime. She let out a shaky breath. I think they leaned on you because you let them, and because it was easier than fixing their own mess. Her words stung because they were true. I pictured another night from years ago, a flashback that replayed in my head like a film spliced into the present. I was 21, standing in the kitchen with my laptop open, rerouting part of my first full-time paycheck to cover a mortgage payment we were a little short on. My father had patted my shoulder and called me a good girl. My mother had said, "You're such a blessing. You'll understand when you have kids." No one had asked what I wanted to do with that check. Back on the park bench, my sister's voice pulled me back. But I also think, she continued, that I'm the one whose future is on the line right now. If tuition doesn't get paid, I might lose my spot. And I hate that I'm even saying this, because I know how messed up it is, but I need you. Her eyes finally met mine, and there it was, the tug of war between understanding and desperation. Anger flared in me, not at her, but at the system we had grown up in. That's the problem, I said carefully. They taught you to need me instead of teaching you how to stand on your own. They did the same to me. The difference is, I've had more years to unlearn it. I swallowed hard. I love you. I want you to succeed. But I can't go back to being the only safety net while they keep spending like nothing's wrong. So what, I just drop out? She snapped, the raw fear in her voice sharpening into anger. Heads turned nearby and she lowered her voice again. You walked away. You got to choose. I'm stuck. You're not stuck, I replied, even though I knew how trapped she felt. You have options: financial aid, scholarships, more hours at your part-time job, maybe even switching schools later if you have to. None of those options are easy, but they exist. The option where I sacrifice my future so everyone else feels comfortable, I shook my head. That one's gone. She blinked back tears, jaw clenched. Dad says you're punishing them, she whispered. That you're doing this to get back at them for pushing you your whole life, are you? I thought about the night I packed my boxes while they watched TV in the living room, not offering to help. I thought about the text I'd sent from the cafe, about the way my mother's voice had gone cold when she realized I wasn't bluffing. Part of me wanted to say no, to claim the moral high ground. Instead, I went with the truth. I'm protecting myself, I said. If that feels like punishment to them, maybe it's because they're finally feeling the consequences of their choices. She was quiet for a long time. The sounds of the park washed over us again. Children yelling, a dog barking, someone's music faint in the distance. Finally, she said, I hate this. I hate that they put us in this position. I hate that I'm mad at them and mad at you at the same time. She wiped at her eyes. But I also hate who you were before. I could see how tired you were. I just didn't know how to help. You're helping now, I told her. By seeing it. By not pretending it was fine. I took a breath. Listen, I can't pay everything anymore. That's not happening. But I can help you look for scholarships, side jobs, anything that makes you less dependent on them. On me. Long term, that's worth more than another transfer. She nodded slowly, still unsure, but not shutting down. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. Just don't disappear on me, okay? Even if you disappear from them. I won't, I promised, but we're done playing by their rules. As we walked out of the park together, I realized our relationship had shifted. We were no longer one hero and one dependent. We were two people standing in the wreckage of our parents' choices, trying to build something healthier from the ground up. The invitation came in the form of a text from my mother. Can you come over for dinner Sunday? We need to talk. No emojis, no extra words, just that. If it had arrived a few months earlier, I would have panicked and immediately offered to send money instead, hoping to buy my way out of whatever conflict was brewing. Now I stared at the message for a long time, then typed, I can come, but I'm not discussing going back to how things were. She replied with a simple, understood, which somehow made me more nervous than if she'd sent a wall of guilt. On Sunday evening, I walked up the familiar path to the house that no longer felt like mine. The lawn was overgrown, a small detail that wouldn't have existed when I still lived there. I used to mow it on weekends between shifts. The paint on the porch railing was peeling. A stack of unopened mail sat crookedly in the box by the door. Little signs of negligence that didn't come from laziness, but from distraction and stress. When I stepped inside, the smell of my mother's cooking wrapped around me, warm and nostalgic. For a second, I almost allowed myself to sink into it. Then I noticed the unpaid bills fanned out on the coffee table, the tension in the air so thick it could have been another piece of furniture. My father sat in his usual chair, eyes on the TV but not really watching. He muted it when he saw me. You came, he said, like he hadn't been sure I would. I said I would, I replied, hanging my coat carefully, as if the wrong movement might shatter whatever fragile truce this was. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile was tight, her eyes tired. Dinner's almost ready, she said. Let's sit down. We ate in near silence at first, the clink of forks against plates filling the room. It felt like a normal family dinner if you ignored the stack of documents at the end of the table. Bank statements, overdue notices, letters from the university. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Your mother and I have been talking, he began, which was ironic, because talking was the one thing we'd avoided for years. About what? I asked, even though the answer sat between us in paper form. About everything, he said, gesturing vaguely. The house, the bills, your sister's tuition. Things have gotten tighter since you left. He said it like a weather report, as if the financial storm had just drifted in from nowhere and not from years of living beyond their means and counting on me to patch the holes. My mother jumped in. We didn't realize how much you were covering. We thought we were managing together. But now the mortgage is behind, the utilities are late, and the school is threatening to drop your sister from her classes if payments don't catch up. Her voice cracked on the last word. We're scared, Nina. For a moment, I just looked at them. The people who had told me to pack my things like I was disposable were now asking for help from the daughter they'd treated like a line item on their budget. And yet, seeing my mother's hands shake as she reached for a bill, seeing the faint gray at my father's temples I hadn't noticed before, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt tired. So tired. I'm not surprised things are tight, I said calmly. I was sending home more than half my income. Of course you felt it when that stopped. I tapped the nearest envelope lightly. This was always going to happen. The only difference is before, it would have happened to me instead of you. My father stiffened. We're not saying you have to do everything, he protested, though that had been exactly what they'd expected for years. We just need a little help, a bridge until we figure things out. You're doing well now, you've got your own place, your career. I have my own place because I scraped together everything I had. I cut in. I'm doing well because I stopped bleeding money into a house where I wasn't even welcome. Don't rewrite this like I abandon you from some comfortable position. You pushed me out and tried to keep my wallet. The room went quiet. My mother swallowed hard. We made mistakes, she admitted softly. We were unfair. We took advantage of how responsible you are. We told ourselves it was for the family, for your sister's future. But we never asked what it was doing to yours. For that, I'm sorry. The apology landed awkwardly, late, imperfect, but real enough that I felt something in my chest loosen. Still, an apology wasn't enough to drag me back into the old pattern. I appreciate you saying that, I said. But I'm not going back to sending thousands of dollars every month so everyone else can avoid making hard choices. So what are you saying? My father asked, frustration creeping back in. You're just going to watch us lose everything? Watch your sister get kicked out of school? His voice rose, the familiar guilt tactic sliding back into place like a well-worn glove. I'm saying I will help in ways that don't destroy me, I replied. I'll sit down with you and go through your budget. I'll help you talk to the bank, refinance if that's possible, negotiate with the school, look at payment plans, scholarships, anything. I'll even contribute some money if there's a clear plan that doesn't rely on me being the sole provider. I met his eyes steadily. But I won't be your bailout anymore. I won't live my life in ruins so this house looks fine from the outside. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. My mother looked between us, then pushed the stack of bills toward me. Show us, she said quietly. Show us what it looks like to do this without leaning on you for everything. There was fear in her voice, but also something new, begrudging respect, maybe, or at least recognition that I knew what I was talking about. We spent the next hour going through numbers. It was brutal. Subscriptions they didn't use, takeout they could no longer afford, a car loan that needed to go. My father bristled every time I suggested cutting something, but he didn't walk away. My mother took notes, tears slipping down her cheeks when she saw in black and white what they'd been pretending not to see. By the time I stood up to leave, we had a rough plan. They'd sell the car and get something cheaper. My father would look for weekend shifts. My mother would take on extra hours. I would cover one overdue utility bill and help my sister apply for emergency aid and scholarships. But only those things, and only once. No more endless transfers. No more unspoken obligation. Real help, with real limits. At the door, my father hesitated, then said, "You're different." It wasn't an accusation this time, more an observation. You sound like someone who isn't scared of us anymore. I am scared, I admitted, hand on the doorknob. But I'm more scared of waking up 10 years from now and realizing I let my life disappear into bills that weren't mine. I looked back at him. You raised me to be responsible. This is what responsibility looks like now. On the train ride home, I stared at my reflection in the dark window, the city lights streaking across the glass. I didn't feel like the villain they'd painted me as. I felt like someone who had finally stepped out of a role she never auditioned for. Still, a quiet voice nagged at me. Was it enough? Had I done the right thing? If you were in my place, would you have paid those bills to keep the peace? Or would you have drawn the same line and watched the fallout? After that dinner, something in me shifted for good. It wasn't just about saying no anymore. It was about learning how to build a life where my default answer didn't have to be, I can't. My family needs the money. Drawing boundaries was one thing. Making sure I had the strength and stability to keep them was another. Jason was the one who first mentioned Victor. He's a financial advisor who comes in here sometimes, he said one slow afternoon at the cafe, wiping down the counter. Helps people get their lives together after years of doing damage control. Sounds like your entire biography. He shot me a look that was half teasing, half serious. You should talk to him. Part of me bristled at the idea of needing help. I'd been managing other people's crises for so long that asking for guidance on my own felt almost like failure. But the deeper I got into my parents' paperwork and my own, the more I realized how much I'd been improvising. I knew how to stretch a paycheck, not how to grow one. So when Jason introduced us one morning, I swallowed my pride and sat down with Victor at a corner table. "Tell me what you want," Victor said, notebook open, pen ready. He didn't start with numbers. He started with me. "Not what you think you're supposed to want. What you actually want." The question caught me off guard. "I want breathing room," I said slowly. "An emergency fund that isn't constantly on fire. A future that doesn't depend on whether someone else decides to need me that month. I want to be able to help people because I choose to, not because I'm cornered." I hesitated, then added, "And I want to stop feeling guilty every time I keep $1 for myself." He nodded, like he'd heard some version of this many times before. "First rule," he said. "Your oxygen mask goes on first. You can't save anyone if you're suffocating. Second rule, money without boundaries is just a leak. We're going to plug the holes before we build anything bigger." We went through my finances in painful detail. Every paycheck, every bill, every transfer I'd made out of obligation. Seeing it all laid out like that was brutal. Years of my life reduced to rows and columns, a map of where my energy had gone. But it was also clarifying. Victor helped me set up automatic savings transfers, separate accounts for fixed expenses and fun, and a structure that didn't crumble the second someone else had an emergency. "Your generosity isn't the problem," he said at one point, glancing up from the laptop. "The problem is that you've been using it as a substitute for their responsibility. That's not kindness. That's enabling." The word stung, but it fit. I'd been enabling everyone around me to avoid changing, because changing would have meant they had to see what they were doing to me. At work, the shift in my mindset spilled over into everything else. I started speaking up more in meetings, pushing back when deadlines were unreasonable, negotiating for better project terms instead of automatically saying yes. My boss noticed. "You've changed," she remarked one afternoon as we wrapped up a campaign debrief. "In a good way. More decisive. Less apologetic." "I guess I finally realized no one is going to hand me the life I want," I said. "I have to build it myself." She smiled and mentioned a new leadership track project coming up, one that would come with a raise if I could handle it. A year ago, I might have turned it down, worried about the extra pressure or the impact on my availability for my family. This time, I said, "I'm interested. Tell me more." Meanwhile, the situation at my parents' house was evolving in the background like a slow-moving earthquake. They had sold the car, taken on extra shifts, and started sticking, begrudgingly, to the budget we'd sketched out. There were still tense calls, still moments where my father slipped and tried to guilt me into just one more transfer. But I held the line. "I can help with information," I would say, "not with endless money." Every time I repeated it, it got a little easier. My sister sent updates from campus, long nights, scholarship applications, extra hours at her part-time job. "I'm exhausted," she texted once, "but it feels different now. Like I'm working for my future, not waiting for you to rescue me." That message meant more to me than any apology my parents had offered. Some people think revenge is about watching someone burn. For me, it started to look more like this. Watching the people who took me for granted finally sit with the consequences of their choices, while I quietly built a life where their chaos couldn't swallow me whole. It wasn't about ruining them. It was about refusing to keep ruining myself. One rainy evening, as I transferred a portion of my paycheck into a growing savings account, I realized something almost shocking. I wasn't terrified anymore. Worried. Sure. Life is expensive and unpredictable. But the constant dread that used to sit in my chest, the feeling that one phone call could destroy everything, I'd lived with that for so long I hadn't noticed when it started to fade. Victor called it progress. Jason called it glowing up with spreadsheets. I called it reclaiming my life, one boundary and $1 at a time. By the time spring rolled around, my apartment no longer looked like a crash pad. It looked like a life. Plants I hadn't killed yet lined the windowsill. Prints from local artists covered the walls. My tiny desk in the corner had become a real workspace, piled with campaign briefs and sticky notes instead of unpaid bills. There were still rough edges, secondhand furniture, chipped mugs, but every piece had been chosen by me, paid for by me. It felt earned. To celebrate landing the leadership track project and the raise that came with it, I decided to host a small gathering. Nothing fancy, just a few coworkers, Jason, and a couple of neighbors I'd gotten to know. We squeezed into my living room with takeout containers and mismatched glasses, the air buzzing with laughter and overlapping conversations. For the first time in a long time, the noise around me didn't mean drama was brewing. It meant community. "You know this is wild, right?" Jason said at one point, leaning against the kitchen counter with a drink in hand. "6 months ago, you were sleeping on a couch, wondering if you were a terrible person for finally saying no. Now look at you, hosting grown-up parties and talking about retirement accounts." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling. Don't get carried away. I still eat cereal for dinner sometimes. "Yeah, but it's cereal you bought for yourself," he shot back. "And you're not checking your balance every time you swipe your card. That's huge." He wasn't wrong. The constant financial anxiety had dulled from a blaring siren to a low hum. I still had responsibilities, still helped in specific limited ways when it made sense. But I wasn't bleeding out for everyone else anymore. My family had adjusted, painfully and imperfectly. My parents were staying afloat through their own effort instead of mine. My sister was hanging on in school thanks to a patchwork of aid, work, and her own grit. It wasn't easy for any of us, but for once the hard work was being shared. Later that night, when most of the guests had gone and the last of the dishes clinked in the sink, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, expecting a meme from a coworker or a "thanks for tonight" text. Instead, I saw my mother's name. My stomach tightened out of habit, but I answered. "Hey," I said cautiously, stepping into the quieter hallway. "Hi, honey." Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, worn down at the edges. "Did I catch you at a bad time?" "I've got people over, but most of them are leaving," I replied. "What's going on?" There was a slight pause, then, "We got another notice from the bank," she said. "It's about the house. They're reviewing our refinance request, but they might not approve it. We're doing everything we can, but if it doesn't go through, we might have to sell. Your father is taking it hard." Her voice shook. "This is the house you grew up in, the house we brought you home to. The idea of losing it—" My throat tightened. No matter how much hurt lived inside that house, it was still woven into my childhood. Birthday parties, late-night talks, the feeling of coming home from school and dropping my backpack in the same spot by the door. The idea of it belonging to someone else felt wrong in a way I hadn't prepared for. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, and I meant it. "Have you talked to the bank about all the income changes, the extra shifts, the budget we worked out?" "We have," she replied. "They said it helps, but it might not be enough. And I know we don't have the right to ask you for anything more after everything we've already asked, but—" She trailed off, then forced the words out. "If they say no, could you help with one last payment? Just to buy us time to figure something else out?" There it was. The plea. The familiar fork in the road. In the silence that followed, I could hear muffled laughter from my living room. Someone turned the music up slightly. Jason called out something about dessert. Two realities pressed against each other in that hallway. The life I was building and the life I'd come from, both demanding loyalty. I closed my eyes and pictured my bank account, my plans, the goals Victor and I had mapped out. I also pictured my parents boxing up their things, a for sale sign in the yard, strangers living in the room I'd once been kicked out of. It would have been so easy to cave, to throw money at the problem and postpone the pain for a few more months. But that was the trap. Postponing never fixed anything. It just delayed the inevitable and drained me in the process. I can't save the house, I said finally, the words tasting like ash and relief all at once. I'm not in a place to float another mortgage payment, and even if I were, it would only delay what you might have to face anyway. You and Dad need a home you can actually afford without my income propping it up. Holding on to this place at any cost isn't love, it's denial. My mother was quiet for a long time. I could hear faint sniffles through the phone. I was afraid you'd say that, she whispered. But I also knew you would. You're right. I hate it, but you're right. I'm not abandoning you, I added quickly. I'll help you look at rentals, run numbers, figure out what actually works. I'll even come help pack if it comes to that. But I won't burn down my future to keep a roof over your heads that you can't sustain. I can walk with you through this. I just can't carry it for you. When we hung up, my chest ached, but I didn't feel that crushing sense of betrayal and panic I used to. I felt grounded, sad, but steady. I walked back into the living room, where Jason handed me a plate and raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Not really, I admitted. But I'm okay, and that's new. He nodded like he understood more than I was saying. That's what matters. As the night wound down and I locked the door behind the last guest, I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the quiet aftermath of good noise. Empty glasses, stray napkins, the faint echo of laughter. This quiet felt nothing like the one that had crushed me in my first weeks alone. This one felt earned, chosen. My parents might lose the house. My sister might have to take the long road through school. Our family would never be the same as it once was. But maybe that wasn't a tragedy. Maybe it was the only way any of us were ever going to grow. They had kicked me out and still expected me to pay. In the end, I did pay, but not with my future, my sanity, or my self-respect. I paid with distance, hard choices, and boundaries that held, even when it hurt. And honestly, that price was worth it. So now I'm curious. If your family treated you like their personal ATM, how far would you go to break that pattern? Would you risk being called the villain to finally become the main character in your own life?